I think for a lot of people, the design of the site winds up lulling them into not realizing everyone else is looking at it. And they don't have that, wait a minute, do I really want this out there where these other people could see it?
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned the generational gap, because do you think this is an issue with, I guess, people in my generation, in terms of viewing this as less of a concern than it actually should be, with the fact that, oh, you know, my information is going to be out there anyway, so really who cares? Or the fact that it's really just not understood, and if people actually sat down and realized what they were doing, then that concern would sink in.
Yeah, it's a big, really difficult, interesting question. And there are a lot of ways to look at it. And so one thing you could say is that, you know, kids these days, they just don't recognize the value of privacy. But oh, when they're 50 and running for president,
right,
they're going to be really sorry about this.
But then you could say everybody's going to be in that same position, and will it become part of the norm?
You could say that. I mean, what I'm afraid of is that everybody's in that position, except for maybe this one kid who was really careful. And now, great, that's the only person we can have to run for
So
president.
if you ever ran for president, you would probably have a completely clean slate from Facebook.
Yeah, except my blog has all sorts of intemperate things. Because I was the same way with blogging almost. You know, go back to when I started blogging in the early 2000s, and, you know, there are things in there that are not deeply personal, but I've said enough strongly worded things that I'm ineligible for high office now.
Right.
And the question is, are we witnessing some kind of big shift in which people are willing to say lots of things, and we don't have quite the same, I don't know, tone of condemning them for saying, you know, for having a private life that they don't keep completely secret?
Well, you know, in the article, you mentioned several solutions that would certainly not work in protecting the privacy interests of users on Facebook. You spoke about market forces, privacy policies, technical controls, and other things to that degree. Could you expand on those?
Yeah, so I mean, let's start with the idea that, you know, let's just let the market sort it out. If people don't want to blow up their privacy, they shouldn't use Facebook. It's not Facebook's problem to fix. People will switch to networks that protect their privacy better. People should read the Facebook privacy policy and understand what it means, and then, you know, act accordingly. And this sounds great until you sort of look at the privacy policy, which says, essentially, we don't guarantee any privacy for you whatsoever.
And no one really looks at the privacy policy either on the majority.
Most people don't read privacy policies. There's a great study by some Carnegie Mellon computer scientists that says if everybody actually read all the privacy policies of the sites they use regularly, it would cost the economy billions of dollars a year. And what's more, there's another study by some other economists that show that, in fact, people who read privacy policies misunderstand what they say. In fact, sometimes they're better off not having read them because they have a worse understanding after reading the policy.
Right.
So the idea that people are reading these policies and making a rational choice about what to do based on them, that's just a myth. And I think also when you think about the market forces, you know, it would be great to have a, you know, fair competition. People pick the level of privacy they want. But it's in the nature of the social network that you need to be where all of your friends are. You can't have everyone, your friends be on Facebook, and then you off using your own personal social network. There's no network there. There's just you.
Right.
And so when everybody else is there, the fact that they've all decided to plunge into these, you know, shark-infested privacy waters means if you want to hang out with them, you need to take the shark risk too.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of possible solutions that might work, what would be, I guess, looking to the future, what would be available in terms of really protecting people's privacy? Is there even such a way?
So there are several things that I've talked about in the paper that I think are great ideas. Let me talk about one of them that I like. I'll talk about an idea that another guy's had very recently that I also like. First thing that I think would be reasonable to do is to rely on the privacy torts. We have this tort in the U.S., this public disclosure of private facts, which is meant to basically protect people's privacy from having other people go around publishing possibly embarrassing things about them that they would have wanted to be kept private. And unfortunately, the way that courts have applied this doctrine they've tended to say, unless you kept it secret, it's not private. You had to have told nobody, and if you told somebody and then it got out, too bad for you. But privacy scholars like Daniel Solov and Lior Strahilovitz have pretty sharply criticized this idea that secrecy is the only way for something to be private. Mm-hmm. There are things that I tell a few people, and it's sort of private within the club or within the family. And I had a pretty reasonable expectation that it would never get beyond that small group, and somebody who chooses then to leak it and put it on the front page of the local newspaper really has compromised my privacy, even though it wasn't totally secret. I think the same idea can work on a social network site. You ask, was this information sent in a way such that it really wouldn't have expected to get much further? So if I send you a private message on Facebook, I don't think that's something public. I think that still really is legitimately private. You've seen it, maybe you forward it to somebody else, but it's still pretty well contained. So there are some things that happen on Facebook that we should recognize as private, and the law should protect people from having those disclosed to the public. The other idea that I've seen written about very nicely in a bunch of papers is to think about the software settings and what they encourage people to do. So most people never change the default settings on their Facebook profiles. They leave the privacy exactly the way it came when Facebook set up the page for them.
And do you think they're unaware of those privacy settings, that they're able to change them?
In some cases, yes. In other cases, they go to the page and it's just so overwhelming that they give up and never touch it. But you can try to nudge those defaults in ways that help mimic what people would have actually expected. So Facebook is moving more towards a policy that anything you post as your status is for the public. I'm not sure that's a great policy, because I don't think people who are posting these messages on the Facebook site really mean for everybody to be able to see them. I think they're thinking of those things as relatively private. If you wanted to be more public, you'd use a blog or Twitter. People use Facebook precisely because they want some way of talking that's not to the whole world, but instead to their social network.
Now, what do you think the future potential is of Facebook? Because I remember when I first logged on to Facebook back in 2005, I mean, I never could have imagined that it would turn into this. So in terms of, as you mentioned, going forward, in terms of privacy, but also just in general, as Facebook as a mechanism by itself, how do you think the future holds for it?
So I like social networks. I think the kinds of socializing that happen on them are both natural extensions of our offline friend networks. We have engagement on these things that allows us to keep up old contacts with people, have late night exchanges of jokes with folks we haven't seen in person in a couple of years. And this is actually a really nice feature. In some ways, I see Facebook and these networks being a mixture of just hanging out and socializing, and it's all about people being really creative in unexpected ways. But I think the sort of that loose ties networking, my keeping up with people who I've been important to me in the past or I'll see again soon, and that kind of, hey, I'm actually aware of what more people are doing, and I feel connected to a larger community, is one of these huge potentials of social networking. I think one of the reasons Facebook took off is that it let people do that. And I'm just very excited to see that kind of continuous engagement with a lot of people, especially if it can happen in a way that keeps a lot of the individual one-on-one interactions from being just completely out there in the public eye.
All right, well, if we can shift a little to more of the negative side. After Facebook introduced Beacon, I believe, in 2007, about a year later there was a class action lawsuit brought against Facebook for that introduction. Now, if you could explain what exactly is Beacon and why was this lawsuit brought, and tell us about everything else.